The sound of the Magico S5 is especially revealing and is a benchmark in this regard. This raises questions that I believe every serious, thoughtful audiophile needs to think about. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, audiophiles and music lovers. Today we'll be reviewing the brand new Magico S5 2024 speakers. I hope you enjoy it. Magico, as you may know, is one of the premier loudspeaker manufacturers in the world. That's not just PR fluff. Magico can lay claim to making the best loudspeaker in the world, the $750,000 M9. Along with Wilson and MBL, Magico has operated at the very high end of the speaker world for decades. They also make a full range of speakers all the way down to about $10,000 per pair. The S5 2024, you can think of it as the S5 Mark III, is from the middle S line of Magicos. These sit above the A series, but below the aforementioned M series. The S5 features a crazy level of engineering effort, but also lives within some kind of a cost budget, whereas the M7 and M9 in particular just kind of put the technical throttle to the floor and see where the price falls. Before I go into more detail about the S5, I need to say that the price will make many of you want to bail, but I think you should stick with me here. Why? The sound of the S5 is especially revealing and is a benchmark in this regard. This raises questions that I think every serious, thoughtful audiophile needs to ponder. Think about, in this case, means think about not having a pre-formulated opinion on. These questions, like air and aging, are there no matter what, but the Magico S5 offers new data on the subject to help with the thinking. So, I hope you'll benefit from watching this whole video, even if the S5 is out of your price range, which it will be for most people. To get to the numbers, the S5 Mark III is priced at $74,500 per pair in soft touch finish and $83,000 per pair in gloss. Why would any speaker cost $75,000? Well, if you're still with me, of course, we know there are lots of speakers over $100,000, so $75,000 isn't anywhere near the highest of the high end. But it's still worth knowing why a somewhat standard-looking speaker is quite expensive, even if it weighs 262 pounds. That's 262 pounds each. I like to start with the problem the manufacturer is trying to solve. In this case, Magico is trying to materially lower loudspeaker error. That might sound nice, but realistically, only a few companies making very high-end speakers can even seriously attempt it when a broad set of audio parameters is taken into account. The result from my extended listening session at Magico's superb headquarters listening room in Northern California is something unusual in my experience. The S5 2024 has a sound reminiscent of what we often hear when we review good electronics. The character of good electronics is pretty minimal, so you tend to notice album-to-album differences in mic placement and instrument positioning and recording environment and compression levels and mixing, more than you sense character from the electronics. It's like that with the S5 2024. You hear bigger album-to-album differences than you heard in the past, and the sense of added character from the speakers is hard to pin down because there isn't much consistent character. I think that's probably because the S5s just don't have a lot of added character. Do you want that? That, class, is today's question. I think you should want it, in the same sense as wanting to get the deepest musical experience. But hey, I work for the Absolute Sound, and we are decades-long advocates of this idea. You need to sort out your goals in your life. As you begin to think about that question, let's take a look at the design of the S5. I think you'll find this interesting. To see how Magico approaches consistent reduction of loudspeaker errors, we need to understand Magico as a speaker R&D company, or, if you prefer, a speaker technology company. They design drivers and cabinets and crossovers. This is somewhat distinctive, but it's the mindset of engineering science together with relatively few budget restrictions that really sets them apart from the many other excellent loudspeaker companies there are. Magico is trying to advance driver materials, driver design, cabinet materials, cabinet manufacturing, and systems integration. Always trying to advance these sciences, and the price points of their speakers allow them to experiment with and try materials and processes that would be out of the question for a speaker at 1/10 the price. As a few years go by, they eventually have a collection of new technologies they've developed. With established products like the S5, they periodically release a new version containing some of the new technologies that fit the scale of the project. That sounds simple, but in this case, it isn't just an upgrade in a driver or two. The S5 2024 has all new drivers, new woofers, and a new mid-range, plus a tweeter derived from the M9. It has a new cabinet that's 30% larger than before. But I think it's in systems integration that the learnings from other designs over the past years come together and are where the big chunk of the tech actually lies. Let's consider a few examples of how they do this. Magico has a Klippel measurement system. This computer acoustic analysis software and robot allows Magico to generate a complete hemispheric view of the output of the speaker at all frequencies. Hemispheric means in all directions around the speaker. This characterization of many parameters, levels, frequencies, angles, and times, can be done overnight, meaning that needed refinements can be discovered and addressed quickly, again and again. The hemispheric element of the Klippel system means that Magico's designers think in terms of power response and can set the goal of very smooth changes in power response with frequency. This is not a natural characteristic of forward-facing cone speakers in an enclosure, but it is necessary for excellent imaging and sound space portrayal. Recent M-Series and now S-Series designs have been able to address or maybe conquer this difficult frontier. Magico uses finite element analysis computer modeling to develop cabinet panel shapes and details that limit vibration. Magico uses curved, extruded aluminum panels and then applies complex in-house CNC shaping to fulfill the requirements of the computer cabinet model. In addition, Magico uses laser interferometry to measure minute remaining real-world cabinet vibrations and apply custom machine bracing and damping, which means vibration-specific thickness and density damping materials for each location where they find excess vibration. Magico has identified new materials for speaker cone surrounds that lower mechanical resistance without the degradation over time usually exhibited by low-resistance surrounds. Magico fuels its engineers using a La Marzocco espresso machine with sensor-based pre-infusion and predictive mass-based profiling. These are just examples of the many details that have to be addressed in creating what amounts to a completely new, state-of-the-art speaker. Magico isn't unique in doing any one of these things. They are more unusual for doing so many of them, and they are unusual in doing new designs quite often, something that helps them go rapidly down the learning curve, which is their goal of minimizing coloration and distortion as perceived by the ear-brain. Many speakers are designed with the idea of getting the speaker to produce some idealized output that mirrors the input signal. But Magico believes that the ear-brain is so central to how we perceive reproduced music that you have to take the evolutionary biology of humans into account. They try to address these issues using cones with crossovers in a box and refining that design to the maximum degree possible. A reasonable debate could be had about radically different approaches. For example, dipoles or horns, omnis, single drivers, subs, DSP, all sorts of things, as the ultimate path to believable music. But we should note that Magico has taken a standard concept to a radical level that may not be easy with some of those other designs. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones, and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks. And now back to the show. All right. Let's talk about sound quality. That's what we're here for. The big idea of the Magico S5 Mark III may be, and I will assert is, its comprehensive effort to minimize coloration. As with electronics, this is the classical definition of what a speaker should do. That may sound super boring or commonplace, but What if this goal isn't what most speakers are actually trying to do? And what if most of the small number of speakers that are aiming at this goal haven't made it to some threshold error level that materially changes the sound the listener hears? Finally, if a company like Magico crossed such a threshold, would the sonic changes wrought be desirable? You've probably comprehended that what I hear with the Magico S5 2024 is some significant reduction in error levels, and you are correct. I will come back to this, but for now, let me mention a few of the impressive things I heard. Number one, realistic piano. This is a hard instrument to do correctly because it's a very broadband percussion instrument. But the S5 delivers dynamics and tonal balance and harmonics in a way very reminiscent of the real thing. Number two, vast and real sounding stage depth. I don't think I've heard more than 2 other speakers that can deliver the sound of the decay in the hall with the believability of the S5. This implies excellent small signal handling and low time smear and carefully managed power response. Number 3, smooth, wide bandwidth. The S5 can reproduce low bass to upper treble and do this with a minimal sense that some frequency bands are peaky or emphasized or depressed. That doesn't mean they don't ever sound bass heavy or a bit bright or slightly recessed, but after listening to many recordings and focusing on the ability to render instruments naturally, you start to conclude that most tonal errors from the S5 are on the recording, because there isn't a consistent pattern on offer, unlike many other speakers. Number 4, high dynamic capability. The S5s rarely sound stressed, and their ability to render both delicate details and drums and driving power music with low distortion is a wonder, I would say. Now, let's get back to our questions. As I said, based on my listening, I would hypothesize that the S5 has delivered a reduction in error levels heretofore rarely seen in high-end speakers. The implications of this are mind-extruding, at least they were for me. After you hear the S5 and maybe a few other very low-error speakers, I haven't heard them all, it dawns on you that many other manufacturers, given a higher error level, naturally choose to shape the distortions of the signal to get a signature sonic profile that will appeal to a segment of the market. To say this in a different way, if you are a designer and you're stuck with an above threshold level of coloration, you might rationally choose to work with that to create a house sound that works well on some recordings. Maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously, designers might make their core work the tuning of their speakers to deliver this sound profile. This is the art of speaker design, at least in this framework. If recording errors could be corrected by offsetting speaker errors, it would potentially be valuable to choose those errors strategically, at least if recording errors are consistent. But there's more. If listeners think that the speaker makes the speaker makes the sound good or makes it bad, then providing a distinctive coloration allows the listener to hang on to an element of character when listening. This character may be reassuring even when the result on a given recording isn't that gratifying. The more listeners are experienced with the sound of stereo systems, and the less they know about the sound of real instruments, the more signature sound might be part of music reproduction being believable and getting the focus on the music for these listeners. For these reasons, I think some people will want more tone shaping than a product like the Magico S5 offers. Some people would be happier with a plus 3 dB bump at 50 or 40 hertz. Some people would like a Gundry dip. Some people would like a steeper monotonic tilt to the frequency response. Some people would like a touch of compression, tubes, and some people would like a touch of expansion, horns, and so on. These things might be better done outside the speakers, but I can't say for sure. Magico marches to the beat of a different drummer, and in this, their philosophy is much like the philosophy of the absolute sound as articulated since the early 1970s. Magico argues, if you adjust the sound profile of the speaker away from a baseline minimal error level, you introduce additional errors, especially in the time domain, and thus can't fully reverse, or maybe reverse much at all, recording errors. Recording errors tend not to follow much of a pattern, so there's not one sound profile that will work to accomplish the imagined goal. Good recordings and especially the best recordings will sound best on a low error speaker, and these recordings are unusually significant because they are most likely to be believable. Approached from the Magico mindset, or the task mindset if you prefer, the S5 allows you to mostly forget about the speakers. You start to assume the speaker is delivering the signal, and you move your focus to appreciating the recording and the music. This shift in focus, if it fits your psychology, is the real wonder of the S5 2024. Now, I think it's fair to say that the S5 will also render some recordings harder to enjoy. I would say that's because those recordings are flawed, at least if viewed from the perspective of what would sound best on a great stereo or sound good in real life. As an example, Maren Morris had just released a new album, and I think the mixing and mastering people should be given a stern lecture and sent to their rooms without dinner. I didn't enjoy such recordings on the S5, but I don't recall enjoying recordings like that on any system. A key question raised for those who fit with the philosophy of the S5 is whether good and great recordings are good enough and numerous enough to merit being heard in a mostly unmanipulated way. Because if significant numbers of recordings are good to great, then eschewing the colorations of managed speakers would be worth it. Your sense of this may depend on the kind of music you listen to and how wide or narrow your tastes are. The S5 is for people who actually want to know what is on the recording because they believe and have experienced that this leads to the highest level of music satisfaction. That sounds morally upright and laudable, but too few listeners have had the chance to actually hear what this level of speaker can do so that they can make an informed decision. At least at or above the S5 price level, you now have a choice to experience this level of transparency. That's why I think the S5 2024 qualifies as a breakthrough. It may be the lowest price speaker that delivers a coloration level at this threshold low level when considered across the full frequency band and all the way from the terminals to the brain. I should note that you have another choice which the S5 presents in stark relief. The S5 philosophically works on the well-discussed problems of linearity and resonances and timing and bandwidth and diffraction. They also work on smooth parametric changes with frequency. This is impressive, but the S5 doesn't do anything radical for the task list of major audio problems, like the problem of bass in real rooms, or the flaws of stereo, or digital distortions, or visual imagery. Of course not, you might say, and I think you'd mostly be right, but this does mean that the S5 accomplishments have a more subtle character than you may expect based on my description above. The S5 doesn't try to be different, it tries to be better. All right, let's summarize. I listened to a series of tracks from, for example, Trio Metral and Taylor Swift and Bebe and Charles Lloyd and the Minnesota Orchestra, among many, many others on the S5. The S5 draws clear distinctions between the engineering on these to a greater degree than any other speaker system I've heard. It makes sense to me that a low-error speaker will be more revealing because the less speaker coloration is part of the mix, the more you hear the recordings themselves. But that doesn't tell you if those revelations are something you want to notice. I initially had mixed feelings about this, but on reflection, I think the S5's revelations would be an audio concern that receded into the background if I listened to the S5 every day. What wouldn't recede is the ability to hear into the music deeply and enjoy the musicianship on offer from the performers. That's what brings real joy. Speaking of joy, I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Magico S5 2024. If you have, I'd invite you to check the description for a link to subscribe to our weekly newsletters, where you can get many, many more reviews every week, as well as articles on interesting audio topics. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.